The bizarre mission of April 9, 1944, when one pilot faced an entire Luftwaffe squadron. Before we begin this incredible story, please subscribe and hit that like button. These deep historical investigations take months of research, and your support helps us continue bringing you these remarkable, untold stories from World War II. Now let's dive into one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in aviation history. Chapter 1. The Morning That Changed Everything. Dawn broke over the airfield at RAF Debden in Essex, England, on April 9, 1944. The date would mean nothing to most people, just another spring morning in the fourth year of war in Europe. But for the men of the 4th Fighter Group, this day would become the subject of whispered conversations, classified reports, and a decades-long mystery about what really happened in the skies over France. Captain William Bill Hartley was 24 years old. Though he looked older, combat had a way of aging men beyond their years, etching lines around their eyes from constant squinting into bright skies, searching for the glint of sunlight on enemy aircraft that meant the difference between life and death. He'd flown 37 combat missions, which made him a veteran in a war where many fighter pilots didn't survive their first 10. The briefing that morning was routine, an escort mission for B-17 bombers hitting marshalling yards near Paris. The targets were railroad junctions, supply depots, infrastructure that fed the German war machine occupying France. Nothing unusual. The 4th Fighter Group would provide top cover for the bombers, protecting them from Luftwaffe interceptors during the most vulnerable portions of the mission. Expected fighter opposition is moderate, the intelligence officer said, pointing to the map with his wooden pointer. The Luftwaffe has been conserving their strength lately, but don't get complacent. They're still capable of putting up significant numbers when they choose to. Maintain formation discipline, stay with the bombers, and bring everyone home. Standard orders. Protect the bombers. Stay together. Don't go chasing after individual targets. Fighter pilots had a natural instinct to pursue enemy aircraft. That's what they were trained to do. But escort duty required discipline. The bombers came first. Hartley listened with half his attention. He'd heard similar briefings 36 times before, but something felt different this morning. He couldn't articulate what exactly. Just a tension in the air, a sense that today would be significant somehow. His squadron mate, First Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Patterson, noticed Hartley's distraction during the walk to their aircraft. "You okay, Bill? You seem somewhere else." Hartley shook his head as if clearing cobwebs. "Fine. Just tired, I guess. Didn't sleep well. Bad dreams?" Something like that. They reached their P-51 Mustangs, those beautiful aircraft that had changed the air war over Europe. With their distinctive profile and the range to escort bombers all the way to targets deep in Germany, Mustangs had given the Allies air superiority. Hartley's aircraft bore the name Catherine's Pride on the nose, his wife's name, a reminder of what he was fighting to get back to. The ground crew chief, a sergeant from Missouri named Tom Brennan, gave Hartley his pre-flight report. "She's in perfect shape, sir. Fueled, armed, and ready. All systems checked out. She'll bring you home." "Thanks, Tom. She always does." Hartley performed his walk-around inspection, checking control surfaces, examining the 650 caliber machine guns that bristled from the wings, ensuring nothing looked amiss. Everything was in order. Catherine's Pride was ready for another mission. The takeoff and formation assembly proceeded smoothly. 16 P-51s from Hartley's squadron climbed into the morning sky, circling, finding their positions in the defensive formation. Below them, the English countryside looked peaceful. Green fields, small villages, the network of roads that had existed for centuries. Hard to believe that just 100 miles away, 2 massive military forces were locked in mortal combat. They rendezvoused with the bomber formation over the channel, 48 B-17 flying fortresses in tight defensive boxes, their aluminum skin gleaming in the morning sun. Each of those bombers carried 10 young men and several tons of high-explosive ordnance. Protecting them was more than just tactical necessity, it was personal. Every fighter pilot knew bomber crews, had friends who flew in those lumbering aircraft, understood that their job was to make sure those men came home. The formation crossed the French coast at 8:47 hours. Below, Hartley could see the scarred landscape of occupied France, bomb craters from previous raids, the geometric patterns of German defensive positions, the evidence of years of war that had turned parts of Europe into moonscapes. "Red flight, this is Red Leader," the radio crackled. Squadron leader Major Robert Bob Collins was calling. "Bandits reported 40 miles ahead, altitude 20,000 feet. Stay alert. Bandits. Enemy aircraft." The tension in every cockpit ratcheted up several notches. This was where the mission became dangerous. What happened over the next hour would be documented in mission reports, debriefing statements, and classified assessments, though the full story wouldn't emerge for decades. And at the center of it all would be Bill Hartley, making a decision that defied orders, violated doctrine, and either saved hundreds of lives or committed one of the most reckless acts in fighter operations history, depending on who you asked. Chapter 2. The Encounter. The German fighters appeared exactly where intelligence had predicted, a formation of Bf-109s and FW-190s climbing to intercept the bomber stream. From Hartley's altitude, they looked like dark specks against the lighter sky, but his experienced eye could read the formation, estimate numbers, predict their likely attack vector. Approximately 30 aircraft. That was the initial count from various pilots calling out sightings. A significant force, but not overwhelming. The escort fighters outnumbered them, and the bomber's own defensive armament would exact a toll on any attack. The standard engagement began, the Luftwaffe fighters trying to position themselves for attack runs on the bombers, the American fighters maneuvering to intercept them. It was aerial chess, played at 300 miles per hour with lives as the stakes. Hartley was flying wing position for Major Collins, staying close, maintaining formation discipline, even as the urge to dive into the fight pulled at him. Years of training and combat experience created almost instinctive reactions: track the enemy, calculate angles, prepare for engagement, but the primary mission remained unchanged: protect the bombers. Then something unusual happened. "Red Leader, this is Blue Flight." A different voice came over the radio. "I've got additional bandits at our 12 o'clock low. Range approximately 10 miles. Large formation. Looks like they're setting up for a coordinated strike." Hartley looked where Blue Flight indicated and felt his stomach tighten. A second wave of German fighters, much larger than the first, was approaching from a different direction. This wasn't the moderate opposition the briefing had predicted. This was a major effort, possibly 60 or more aircraft converging on the bomber formation from multiple angles. The Luftwaffe was committing significant resources to stopping this raid. Major Collins made a quick tactical decision. "All flights, we're splitting our coverage. Red and blue flights take the high threat. Green and yellow flights maintain bomber escort. Keep them off the heavies." The formation split, aircraft peeling off to engage the two different groups of German fighters. Hartley stayed with Collins, following red flight toward the original group of contacts. They dove to gain speed, preparing for the engagement. What Hartley saw next changed everything. As red flight descended toward the German fighters, a gap in the clouds below revealed something that intelligence hadn't warned them about. A third formation of Luftwaffe aircraft, larger than the other two combined. They were lower, hidden by cloud cover, and positioned perfectly to attack the bomber formation from below, while the escorts were engaged with the more visible threats above. It was a trap, a sophisticated, multi-layered trap. The Germans had deployed a visible force to draw off the escorts, while the real strike package waited below, ready to tear into the unprotected undersides of the bombers. Hartley's mind raced through the tactical situation in seconds. Red flight was committed to engaging the high threat. Green and yellow flights were on the opposite side of the bomber formation, dealing with the second wave. No one was positioned to intercept this third group before they reached the bombers. No one except him. "Red Leader, this is Red 2, Hartley called, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I've got eyes on a large formation below, approximately 60-plus aircraft at Angels 15, heading straight for the bomber's vulnerable position. They're about to hit the formation from below." "Red 2, maintain position," Collins ordered. "We're committed here. Someone else will have to handle it." But there was no one else. Hartley could see the geometry of the situation. By the time anyone repositioned to engage the threat below, the German fighters would already be among the bombers. And at that range, with that many attackers, the carnage would be terrible. 48 bombers, 10 crew members each, 480 men. Against doctrine, against orders, against everything he'd been taught about formation discipline and chain of command. Hartley made his decision. "Red Leader, Red 2 is breaking to engage the lower threat." "Negative, Red 2, maintain your—" But Hartley was already diving, pushing Catherine's Pride into a steep descent that pulled the aircraft toward the cloud deck and the enemy formation below. His airspeed indicator climbed rapidly as gravity and engine power accelerated him. 300 miles per hour, 350, 400. He was one aircraft diving toward what he'd estimated as 60-plus enemy fighters. The mathematics of the situation were absurd. The survival probability was essentially zero. But 480 men in those bombers would die if someone didn't do something. So he did something. Hartley burst through the cloud layer at 14,000 feet and immediately confirmed his worst assessment. This wasn't 60 aircraft. It was closer to 80, a full Jagdgeschwader, a fighter wing, concentrated in one massive formation. They were Bf-109s primarily, with some FW-190s mixed in, all climbing steadily toward the bomber formation above. They hadn't seen him yet. He was alone, diving from above, a single P-51 against an entire wing of German fighters. Every instinct screamed at him to break off, to climb back to altitude, to survive. But he'd committed, and he understood something that would be analyzed in tactical studies for decades afterward. He didn't need to defeat this formation. He just needed to disrupt it. One aircraft used aggressively and unexpectedly could create chaos in a large formation if the attack came from the right angle at the right moment. Hartley armed his guns, adjusted his gun sight, picked his target, the lead aircraft in the German formation, and opened fire at maximum effective range. 650 caliber machine guns created a river of tracers, bright lines of fire that crossed the distance between Catherine's Pride and the German formation in a second. Hartley didn't know if he hit anything. At that range, accuracy was questionable, but that wasn't the point. The point was to announce his presence, to create surprise, to force a reaction, and it worked. The German formation, focused on their approach to the bombers above, suddenly had a threat dropping on them from an unexpected angle. The lead elements broke formation, pilots instinctively maneuvering to evade the tracer fire. The tight, coordinated formation that had been preparing for a devastating strike on the bombers began to fragment as individual pilots reacted to the sudden attack. Hartley didn't let up. He dove through the formation, guns blazing, not trying for careful aimed shots but creating as much disruption as possible. Aircraft scattered around him, some breaking left, others right. The coordinated attack dissolving into chaos. But now they knew he was there. And 80 aircraft, even surprised and disorganized, were still 80 aircraft. The German fighters began to turn toward him. They'd been hunting bombers, but now there was a lone American fighter in their midst, and every pilot in that formation wanted the kill. Hartley pulled hard on the stick, banking Catherine's Pride into a climbing turn, using the speed from his dive to regain altitude. Behind him he could see German fighters maneuvering to pursue, their pilots no doubt confused about why a single aircraft would attack such a massive formation but willing to accept the easy victory. Except it wouldn't be easy. Hartley had one advantage in this insane situation. The P-51 Mustang was a superior aircraft to the Bf-109 in several key performance metrics. It was faster in level flight, had better high-altitude performance, and could outdive anything the Luftwaffe had. If he could avoid being surrounded, if he could keep moving, if he was lucky and skilled and the aircraft held together under the stress he was about to put it through, he might survive. But survival wasn't really the goal anymore. The goal was to keep these 80 aircraft focused on him instead of the bombers above. Every second he could hold their attention was another second the bomber formation moved toward its target, another moment of disruption to the German attack plan. So Hartley did something that seemed insane to observers later reviewing the mission. Instead of running, he turned back toward the enemy formation. "Come on," he muttered to himself, lining up another firing pass. "Chase me. Forget about those bombers and chase me." And they did. Chapter 3. The Dance of Death. What followed was perhaps the most unusual aerial engagement of the entire war in Europe. One American fighter pilot, deliberately drawing the attention of an entire German fighter wing, maneuvering through the sky in a desperate attempt to prevent them from reaching the bomber formation above. The official mission reports would later describe it as aggressive defensive action by a single aircraft against superior numbers. That dry language failed to capture the reality. A three-dimensional chess game played at lethal speeds, where every move could be the last. Hartley used every trick he'd learned in 37 previous missions. He'd climb until German fighters closed in, then dive away, using the P-51's superior speed to create separation. He'd make firing passes not because he expected to achieve kills, though he did damage several aircraft, but because it forced the German pilots to maneuver defensively, to break their own formations, to focus on him rather than coordinating an attack on the bombers. The German formation leader, an experienced pilot who later would be identified from Luftwaffe records as Major Hans Richter, a veteran with over 50 victories, quickly understood what Hartley was doing. Radio intercepts captured later revealed his frustration. Single American fighter is disrupting the attack. All aircraft, ignore the lone fighter and continue to primary objective. But his pilots couldn't ignore Hartley. Fighter pilots are aggressive by nature. When an enemy aircraft presents itself, every instinct demands engagement, and this lone American was making himself impossible to ignore, attacking from unexpected angles, creating uncertainty about whether more American fighters might be diving from above, forcing a defensive mindset on pilots who'd been preparing for an offensive strike. Time dilated in combat the way it always did. Seconds felt like minutes. Hartley's world narrowed to the gun sight, the instruments, the constant scan for threats, the pull of G-forces as he maneuvered violently to avoid being hit. His radio was alive with transmissions, controllers trying to understand what was happening, other pilots calling out threats, Major Collins ordering him to break off and rejoin the formation. Hartley ignored all of it, focused entirely on the immediate task. Survive the next 10 seconds, then the 10 seconds after that, keeping the enemy occupied long enough for the bombers to complete their run. A Bf-109 appeared in his peripheral vision, closing fast for a shot. Hartley snap-rolled right, the world tumbling, then reversed left, the sudden direction change throwing off the German's aim. Tracers flashed past his canopy, bright lines of death missing by meters. He countered, pulling into a hard turn that grayed his vision from the G-forces, bringing his guns to bear on the German who'd just attacked him. A 2-second burst, strikes on the enemy's wing. Smoke, but no fire. The Bf-109 broke away, damaged, but still flying. No time to follow up. 2 more fighters diving on him from above. Hartley pushed the stick forward, dropping Catherine's pride into a dive that left his stomach somewhere higher in the sky. The pursuing fighters overshot, unable to match his dive speed. He pulled out at 6,000 feet, engine screaming, airframe shuddering from the stress, and immediately climbed again. The altimeter unwound as he gained altitude. 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 feet. Behind and around him, German fighters swarmed, trying to coordinate their attacks, frustrated by his unpredictable maneuvering. Red 2, this is Red Leader. What is your situation? Collins's voice cut through the radio chatter. Engaged with large hostile formation, Hartley replied, his voice surprisingly calm, given that he was simultaneously talking and performing a barrel roll to evade 2 fighters attacking from his left quarter, keeping them occupied. You need to break off. You can't fight that many aircraft alone. Can't break off, sir. If I disengage, they'll go after the bombers. I can keep them here. There was a pause. Collins knew the tactical situation as well as Hartley did. 1 aircraft couldn't actually fight 80, but 1 aircraft, flown with skill and aggression, could potentially prevent 80 aircraft from accomplishing their mission. The mathematics were insane, but the logic was sound. Understood, Collins finally replied. We're repositioning to support. Hold them as long as you can. As long as you can. That was the question, wasn't it? How long could he maintain this impossible dance before his luck ran out? Before his aircraft took a critical hit? Before exhaustion or a tactical mistake gave the Germans the opening they needed? Hartley's fuel gauge was dropping. Combat maneuvering consumed fuel at an alarming rate. All those climbs, dives, and high-speed turns burned through his tanks far faster than normal flight. He had maybe 20 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption rates. But the bombers were approaching their target. Another 10 minutes, maybe 15, and they'd be on their bomb run. Once they released their ordnance and turned for home, the immediate danger would pass. The Luftwaffe couldn't sustain an attack through the bomber formation's defensive fire and the escorting fighters without coordination, and Hartley had thoroughly disrupted that coordination. He just had to survive 10 more minutes. A new threat appeared. 4 Bf-109s working together, trying to box him in, coordinating their attacks to eliminate his escape routes. This was more dangerous than the individual attempts. These pilots were experienced, working as a team, cutting off his options. Hartley went vertical, pulling Catherine's pride into a straight-up climb that defied physics, trading speed for altitude in a maneuver that left him hanging in space for a moment, nearly motionless at the top of the climb. The pursuing Germans tried to follow, but the P-51's better high-altitude performance gave Hartley a critical advantage. He could go higher, stay there longer, and still have power when the German fighters began to struggle in the thin air. At the top of the climb, he snap-rolled, inverted, and pulled through, converting the climb into a dive that brought him back down on the tail of one of his pursuers. The German pilot, focused on climbing after Hartley, didn't see the reversal until too late. Hartley fired. A long burst, 3 seconds of concentrated fire, strikes all along the fuselage. The Bf-109's canopy shattered, the engine began streaming coolant, and the aircraft rolled inverted and began spiraling toward the earth, either out of control or the pilot already incapacitated. No time to watch it go down. 2 more fighters closing from different angles. Hartley rolled right dove, pulled hard into a climbing left turn that pushed his vision to gray then black at the edges from the G-forces, then leveled out, gasping for breath. His fuel gauge showed 10 minutes remaining at current consumption. His ammunition was down to 30%. He'd been firing frequently, not for kills but for effect, creating disruption. Catherine's Pride had taken several hits, nothing critical yet, but the airframe was accumulating damage, and he was exhausted. Not just physically, though his arms ached from manhandling the controls and his body was bruised from being thrown against his harness during violent maneuvers, but mentally, the constant calculation, the split-second decisions, the awareness that one mistake would be his last. It was draining in a way that nothing else matched. Then his radio crackled with the best sound he'd heard all day. Bombs away, strike successful, all aircraft beginning egress. The bombers had completed their run. They were turning for home. The mission's primary objective was accomplished, which meant Hartley's job was done. Red 2, this is Red Leader, good work. Break off and rejoin formation. We're covering the bombers' withdrawal. Hartley didn't need to be told twice. He'd done what he needed to do, held the German formation's attention long enough. Now survival became the priority. He pushed the throttle forward, pointed Catherine's Pride toward home, and ran. Behind him, the German fighters began to reorganize, but the moment had passed. Their carefully planned strike had been disrupted, the bombers had completed their mission, and the escort fighters were now in position to protect the withdrawal. Major Richter, the German formation leader, made the tactical decision to disengage rather than press an attack that would now cost him aircraft without achieving the objective. The entire engagement had lasted 17 minutes. For Hartley, it felt like hours. Chapter 4. The Return and Reckoning. Catherine's Pride limped back to England on fumes. Hartley's fuel gauge showed empty for the last 20 miles of the Channel crossing. He was flying on residual fuel in the lines, the engine running on vapors, knowing that if the engine quit over water, he'd be ditching in the freezing channel with minimal chance of rescue. The engine kept running, barely, coughing, sputtering, but running. He made it to the English coast, called the tower at Debden, reported his fuel state as critical emergency, and was cleared for immediate landing. Catherine's Pride touched down on the runway, rolled to the taxiway, and the engine quit the moment Hartley turned off the main strip. Complete fuel exhaustion. Another 30 seconds and he would have been gliding. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft. Chief Brennan climbed up to the cockpit, took one look at Hartley's face, pale, sweat-soaked, hands shaking from adrenaline come-down, and immediately understood this had been no ordinary mission. "Sir, are you injured?" "No, just tired, very tired." They helped him out of the cockpit. His legs nearly buckled when his feet hit the ground. Hours of tension releasing all at once, leaving him unsteady. Someone handed him water, which he drank without tasting. The ground crew began assessing Catherine's Pride's damage. 23 holes from machine gun and cannon fire, damage to the left aileron, several hits to the fuselage, one round that had passed through the canopy inches from where Hartley's head had been. The aircraft was flyable but would need extensive repairs. "Sir," Brennan said quietly, "what did you get into out there?" "Something I probably shouldn't have," Hartley replied. Major Collins landed 10 minutes later, and his first action after parking his aircraft was to find Hartley. The squadron leader's expression was unreadable, part concern, part anger, part something else Hartley couldn't identify. "My office. Now." The debriefing was intense, not the normal mission debriefing where pilots casually described enemy contacts and tactical maneuvers. This was Collins, the squadron intelligence officer, and several other senior officers Hartley didn't recognize, all asking questions, taking notes, building a detailed picture of what had happened. "Walk me through your decision-making," Collins said. "You broke formation, disobeyed direct orders to maintain position, and engaged a force of approximately 80 enemy aircraft alone. Explain your reasoning." Hartley laid it out as clearly as he could. The third formation that intelligence hadn't warned them about. The tactical geometry that put that formation in perfect position to devastate the bombers. The fact that no other friendly aircraft were positioned to intercept. The calculation that disruption was possible even if victory wasn't. "I wasn't trying to defeat them," Hartley explained. I was trying to prevent them from executing a coordinated attack on the bombers, break their formation, create confusion, hold their attention, make them focus on me instead of their primary objective. And it worked, one of the unknown officers said. His uniform indicated he was from group headquarters. The bomber formations suffered minimal casualties, only 2 aircraft lost, neither from fighter attack, one from flak, one mechanical failure. Given the size of the enemy force committed, we should have lost 15 or 20 bombers. Your action prevented that. Or, Collins countered, he got lucky. Breaking formation and attacking superior numbers isn't tactics, it's suicide. He violated orders, abandoned his flight leader, and could have been killed. But he wasn't killed, the group officer replied, and his assessment of the tactical situation was correct. He identified a threat that no one else saw, recognized that standard procedures weren't adequate to address it, and took action that achieved strategic success. The debate continued, but Hartley was only half listening. Exhaustion was catching up with him, the adrenaline fully drained now, leaving him empty. Finally, Collins dismissed him. Get some rest. We'll continue this later. Hartley walked back to his quarters in a daze. Other pilots stopped him, asking what happened. Having heard rumors that he'd taken on an entire German squadron single-handed, he deflected their questions, too tired to tell the story properly. He collapsed on his bunk and slept for 14 hours straight. Chapter 5. The Aftermath and Silence. When Hartley woke, he learned that his mission had become the subject of intense discussion up the chain of command. The 4th Fighter Group's commander had written a commendation. The 8th Air Force intelligence staff wanted detailed debriefings about the German tactics. Several officers were arguing that Hartley deserved a medal for extraordinary heroism, but other voices pushed back. Breaking formation was a serious violation. Disobeying direct orders couldn't be overlooked. If Hartley were commended, it would send a message that individual initiative was more important than unit cohesion and chain of command. That could have dangerous implications for future operations. The debate reached higher headquarters where generals and colonels who'd never flown combat missions made decisions based on doctrine, precedent, and political considerations. The final decision was peculiar. Hartley would receive no official commendation, no medal, no public recognition. The mission would be documented in classified reports, but not highlighted in publicity or after-action summaries. As far as the official record was concerned, the mission of April 9, 1944 was successful. Bomber losses were light, and enemy fighter opposition was disrupted, but no individual was credited with exceptional action. Major Collins delivered the news personally. I'm sorry, Bill. I pushed for recognition, but the decision came from above my level. They're worried about the precedent. Can't have every fighter pilot thinking they can break formation whenever they see an opportunity. I understand, sir. Do you? Because you should be getting the Distinguished Service Cross at minimum. What you did saved lives. Everyone who reviews the mission reports understands that. But officially, it never happened the way it actually happened. Hartley shrugged. The bombers made it home. That's what matters. You really believe that? Yes, sir, I do. Collins studied him for a moment. You're a better man than I am, then. I'd be angry about this. Being angry wouldn't change anything. The war continued. Hartley flew more missions, accumulated more combat hours, survived to the end of the European Air War. He was promoted to major, given command of his own squadron, and ended his service with an exemplary record. But that record never mentioned April 9, 1944. After the war, he returned to civilian life, got his engineering degree on the GI Bill, worked for an aerospace company, raised a family with Catherine, and lived a quiet life in Massachusetts. He rarely talked about his wartime service, and when he did, he never mentioned the mission where he'd faced an entire Luftwaffe Squadron alone. The story might have remained hidden forever, if not for a German historian researching Luftwaffe records in the 1970s. Dr. Klaus Hoffmann was writing a comprehensive history of fighter operations over France when he discovered something curious in the after-action reports from Jagdgeschwader 27, dated April 9, 1944. Major Hans Richter, the German formation leader that day, had written an unusually detailed report about a mission that had failed to achieve its objective. He described a carefully planned strike on American bombers that had been disrupted by aggressive action from a single American fighter that broke up our formation and prevented coordinated attack. Richter's report was puzzled and admiring in equal measure. The American pilot displayed exceptional skill and courage, attacking a force many times his size. His action prevented what should have been a devastating strike on the bomber formation. While tactically irrational, His strategy of creating maximum disruption was strategically sound. He understood that he did not need to defeat us, only delay us long enough for the bombers to complete their mission. In this, he succeeded completely. Dr. Hoffman found this account fascinating and began cross-referencing it with American records. The dates matched, the location matched, but American mission reports from April 9, 1944, contained only routine descriptions of escort operations. No mention of a single fighter engaging a large enemy formation. Hoffman spent years piecing together what had happened, eventually tracking down surviving pilots from both sides who'd participated in the mission. The German pilots all remembered the lone American fighter who'd attacked them. It had become something of a legend in their unit, but the American pilots had been ordered not to discuss the mission in detail, and most had honored that directive for decades. Eventually, Hoffman identified Hartley as the pilot at the center of this story. By then it was 1989, and Hartley was 69 years old, retired and living quietly. Hoffman contacted him, explained his research, and asked if he'd be willing to discuss what happened that day. Hartley's initial response was cautious. "I'm not sure there's much to tell. It was a long time ago." But Hoffman persisted, sharing the German accounts, the tactical analyses, the recognition that what Hartley had done was extraordinary, even if officially unacknowledged, and slowly Hartley agreed to talk. The interview, conducted over several days and recorded for historical archives, finally documented the full story. Hartley's motivations, his tactical thinking, his moment-by-moment decisions during the engagement. It was the first time he'd discussed it in detail with anyone outside the military chain of command. "Why did you do it?" Hoffman asked. "You knew the odds were impossible. You knew you were likely to be killed. Why attack when you could have stayed with your formation and survived?" Hartley was quiet for a long time before answering. "Because there were 480 men in those bombers. They had wives, families, futures, and I saw a way to maybe keep them alive. It didn't matter what happened to me, it mattered that they got home. But you were disobeying orders. That's serious in any military. Orders are important. Formation discipline is important. But judgment is important too. Knowing when the situation requires something different than the standard response. I made a judgment that day. Maybe I was right, maybe I was lucky, but I'd make the same choice again. Do you wish you'd been recognized for it?" Another long pause. "No, not really. Recognition would have made it about me, but it was never about me. It was about those bomber crews who came home to their families. Some of them probably never knew why the fighter attack they'd been expecting never materialized. And that's fine. They lived. That's all that mattered." Hoffman's research was eventually published in a specialized military history journal in 1991. A few newspapers picked up the story, and Hartley received some belated recognition, letters from surviving bomber crew members who'd been on that mission, acknowledgments from historians and military analysts who understood the significance of what he'd done. But no official recognition ever came. The military's position remained unchanged. Hartley had violated orders, and commending that violation, even 47 years later, would set a problematic precedent. Hartley seemed unbothered by this. At a small gathering of 4th Fighter Group veterans in 1992, someone asked him how he felt about the military's continued refusal to acknowledge his action. He smiled slightly. "I got to come home to Catherine. I got to have a life, raise kids, see grandchildren. Some of the men I flew with didn't get that. So I'm not going to complain about not getting a medal. I got something better. I got to live." Epilogue. Lessons from the Lone Fighter. William Hartley died in 2003 at the age of 83. His obituary mentioned his military service but gave no details about specific missions. Catherine had passed away 2 years earlier, and they were buried together in a quiet cemetery in Massachusetts. The story of April 9, 1944 remains obscure, known to military historians and aviation enthusiasts who study the air war in detail, but absent from popular accounts of World War II. No Hollywood movie has dramatized the lone fighter attacking an entire squadron. No best-selling book has made Hartley a household name. But among those who study tactical aviation, the mission is considered a masterclass in several principles that remain relevant. First, the value of initiative and judgment. Hartley saw a situation that required immediate action, assessed that standard procedures were inadequate, and made a decision that violated orders but achieved strategic success. Knowing when to follow doctrine and when to deviate requires exceptional judgment, and a willingness to accept consequences if wrong. Second, the concept of asymmetric response. Hartley didn't try to defeat 80 aircraft, an impossible task. He tried to disrupt them, delay them, prevent them from executing their mission. Understanding that you don't need to win every engagement if you can prevent the enemy from achieving their objective is a subtle but crucial insight. Third, the importance of accepting risk for strategic gain. Hartley's action was enormously risky personally, but the potential benefit, saving hundreds of lives, justified that risk in his calculation. Not every tactical situation is about minimizing risk. Sometimes achieving the mission requires accepting risks that seem irrational. Fourth, the recognition that official acknowledgement doesn't determine historical significance. Hartley received no medals, no public recognition, no official commendation, but his action was significant regardless. History ultimately judges based on impact, not official pronouncements. Modern fighter pilots study the mission, usually under different names, with details changed to avoid the political complications of discussing an action that violated orders. The tactical lessons are valuable. How to use a single aircraft to maximum disruptive effect, how to exploit superior aircraft performance against superior numbers, how to maintain situational awareness while under extreme pressure. But perhaps the deeper lesson is about character. Hartley made a split-second decision to risk his life for people he'd never meet, knowing he'd receive no credit, possibly facing disciplinary action, doing it simply because it was the right thing to do in that moment. That kind of selfless courage doesn't require recognition to be real. It doesn't need medals to be valuable. It simply is. A quiet example of human capacity for sacrifice in the service of something larger than individual glory. In the decades since, military psychologists and historians have interviewed hundreds of decorated heroes trying to understand what drives people to extraordinary acts of courage. The consistent answer is surprisingly mundane. They saw a problem, they had a solution, and they acted. No grand philosophy, no complex motivation, just recognition of need and willingness to meet it. Hartley exemplified this. He saw bombers in danger, he had the position and aircraft to potentially help, and he acted. The calculus was simple even if the execution was anything but. The official military history of the air war over Europe contains thousands of pages documenting missions, casualties, tactical developments, and strategic decisions. In all those pages, April 9, 1944, receives perhaps 3 sentences in one appendix. Fighter escort mission to marshalling yards near Paris. Moderate enemy opposition encountered. Mission successful with minimal losses. No mention of the lone fighter who faced an entire squadron. No acknowledgement of the tactical brilliance or personal courage involved. Just dry documentation that a mission succeeded. But history isn't just what's written in official records. It's also the stories that get passed down, the lessons that get learned, the examples that inspire future generations. Bill Hartley's story has been passed down, quietly, among those who value courage over credit, sacrifice over recognition, doing what's right over doing what's safe. Every time a fighter pilot makes a difficult tactical decision under pressure, part of Hartley's legacy lives on. Every time someone chooses mission success over personal safety, his example echoes forward. Every time courage is demonstrated without expectation of reward, his spirit continues. The bizarre mission of April 9, 1944, when one pilot faced an entire Luftwaffe squadron, wasn't officially recognized during his lifetime, but it was real, it was significant, and it saved hundreds of lives. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Thank you for watching this investigation into one of World War II's most extraordinary and least known stories. Bill Hartley never sought recognition for what he did that day over France, but his courage and tactical brilliance deserve to be remembered. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten history. Share this video to help ensure that stories like Bill Hartley's don't remain buried in classified files and obscure historical records. What other untold stories from World War II should we investigate? Let us know in the comments. And remember, sometimes the most important heroes are the ones who never sought to be heroes at all. They simply did what needed to be done, asked for nothing in return, and quietly returned to ordinary life knowing they'd made a difference. That's the best kind of courage there is.